Co-teachers. In general, I hate having a co-teacher. Honestly, they can just be an absolute pain. Possibly because, I have enough experience. I'm kind of set in my ways. I like things done the way I like them done. However, they're not always a pain. In fact, co-teacher can make your life absolutely heaven, especially if you're new at teaching. So today I'm going to be discussing, kind of sharing actually, some of my good and some of my bad ESL co-teaching experiences. And be warned, some of the content today might be a little bit shocking, especially for those of you just thinking about heading overseas for the first time. I'm Teacher David, and this is TESL for Newbies. So as usual, we'll start off today with a bit of a definition. And I'm going to talk about what exactly a co-teacher is and the many roles a co-teacher can play. Then, for the majority of today's content, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to focus on anecdotes, on stories. I'll share some stories to give you somewhat of an idea what you might have to expect when you go overseas and start teaching actually in an ESL classroom. Co-teaching primarily includes two teachers in a classroom, as the name suggests. So you're probably familiar with co-teaching from primary school. Some schools have a kind of general educator, your regular homeroom teacher, and maybe a special teacher in the classroom, a special educator. An example might be a student in your class might have an IEP, so a kind of specialized learning plan for that student because of some sort of learning disability that child is perhaps struggling with. That teacher then focuses not on different content, not on different curriculum, but the same content, the same curriculum, but they just help that student along in whatever way that student needs helping, so that way that student can fulfill his or her potential. In an ESL context, however, this is not the case. Nearly always in cram schools, you're going to have a local teacher and a foreign teacher working together, yet each teacher has distinct roles. The foreign teacher will either make or use a lesson plan already made for him or her, and then teach an English lesson based on whatever that lesson plan is on about. So the day's lesson might be introducing some vocabulary, or introducing reading along with a text, a story, or something similar to that. That's the foreign teacher's job. The local teacher will likely be doing something completely different, and lots of many things that are completely different. For example, the local teacher could be grading homework, grading textbooks, teaching subjects sometimes deemed too difficult for foreign teachers, such as grammar. Classroom discipline, that's the local teacher's responsibility. Discussing with parents, having interviews, local teacher. Assigning homework, writing in communication books, and basically the general maintenance and upkeep of the classroom, including the decoration. Those are all jobs the local teacher has. So again, to repeat, the local teacher has many jobs. The foreign teacher goes in, teaches the lesson, and goes home. At this point, you might be thinking, hey Dave, how is this fair? How come the local teachers have so much more work than the foreign teachers? Well, at least they must be getting paid more than the foreign teachers, right? Really? Do you honestly think so? Such a newbie. By now then, since that isn't the case, you might start or be coming to understand why sometimes just under the surface there's some friction bubbling up. There's some animosity. There's a little bit of anger, in fact. And that can spread out into the classroom pretty easily, as now I'm going to talk about. Co-teacher hell. Now, for this section, I don't have just one teacher in mind, because there is no specific teacher that stands out, because I've experienced this many times. So there are a lot of teachers, a lot of experiences that stand out in my mind. So I'll give you some examples of what I'm on about. I'm teaching a class, then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the teacher interrupts the class while I'm speaking. Usually it's a she, almost 99% of the time your co-teacher in the ESL setting is going to be a woman, so I'll use she. She interrupts the class, asks me to do something, calls out something, usually something not even connected, and the flow of your teaching is just interrupted, and you got to stop, answer the question that could easily have waited until the end of the class, and start again. Another thing that happened to me in the past is I'm teaching something, perhaps a grammar or a writing point, and the local teacher stops me, interrupts the class again, trying to correct me, which is okay, but correcting a teacher in front of the students doesn't really look that good, especially if you correct the teacher incorrectly, which has happened many times. Another time, a teacher took away a student during the class, took that student to the back of the class to do that teacher's homework with the student during my lesson. So that shows no respect at all for what I'm teaching, no respect at all for me as a teacher, and the person's only focusing on themselves. So she, in this case, was only focusing on herself and what she wanted to do. Man, that made me angry. Another thing that frustrates me is when the teacher is bang, 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 banging at the back of the class, making noise while I'm teaching. The kids end up bloody rubbernecking the whole time. What's going on? Hey, what's going on? What's happening? Because that teacher just has no concept or no idea that an interruption to the class matters. Or she just doesn't care that she's interrupting me in the class. Again, the lack of respect, somebody as being an equal in the classroom obviously wasn't there. Another frustrating, I know it's a bit of a rant, but there are many. So another example I have is I have my students sitting in class. They're not allowed to eat in class. They have a bottle of water if they want to drink. The teacher's at the back of the class sitting there eating a meal box, just scarfing it back. No. Before you ask, well, was it lunchtime? Did she miss her lunch? Absolutely not. These were just some leftovers she decided to eat, slurping during class. So, of course, my students ask me, hey, Teacher David, why is she allowed to eat in class but we're not? Good question. I have no idea. And I addressed that with her later on. Complete shock. What? What's wrong? What are you talking about? Oblivion. Perhaps one of the worst experiences I had, or at least the most bizarre, was I had a teacher sitting at the back of the class at her desk, lit an incense stick, a joss stick, had the smoke going in the class, and then she started chanting during my class. Now, I understand I'm in a different country, there are different customs, but really, during class, that's the time you think it's good to light incense sticks and chant? I have no words for how shocked I was and still am about that experience. So as you can see, although we were co-teachers, there was clearly no support, no respect, no co-anything. It was just co-teaching hell. Happily, not all co-teaching experiences are such a nightmare. In fact, some can be amazing. Some can be absolutely great. By far, the best co-teacher I ever had was a local woman here in Taiwan who I'll refer to as H. When I first started working with her, we had a conversation, we had a meeting, and we decided to agree upon what each person was responsible for during class. So we split the teaching subjects. There were certain subjects she was comfortable with, the other subjects she wasn't comfortable with. This is one of those cases I always harp on about. I was very comfortable, and still am very comfortable, teaching grammar right up to university level. I like grammar, I enjoy it. She was not comfortable teaching grammar. She wanted nothing to do with it, so we separated it in that way. I taught grammar, writing, reading comprehension. She taught a few other areas that she was comfortable with. Great, it worked out well. We shared discipline in the class. For example, if a student was acting up during class, I told her I didn't want her to jump in and take care of the student, because then students start to think, oh, Teacher David can't deal with students being naughty, so Teacher H, she has to jump in and deal with it all the time. No, I want them to respect both of us equally. So I'll deal with students when they get a little bit out of control. She deals with them when they get out of control during her time. Marking. According to the school, she was supposed to do most of the marking, if not all. I didn't believe that was fair, and I thought it was a bit overwhelming, especially on areas that I wanted to focus on. So for example, when we did essay writing, even with young kids here in Asia, they're doing essay writing. I wanted to do the marking because there are certain methods that I use when I mark an essay that I wanted to use with that class. She was perfectly fine. Great. You do that. You mark the grammar. You mark whatever you want to mark, and then she'll mark the rest. And we came up to an arrangement. We agreed with it, and both of us were completely happy with that arrangement. So, as you can see, even though I acknowledged that H had a heavier workload than I did, she still had to deal with communication books. She still, in general, dealt with parents. There were a lot of things that she had on her plate that I didn't. I could still come in, teach my class, and aside from staying for a few minutes afterward doing some marking, if I needed to, I could just leave. She was there before class began and there after class finished. I acknowledged that. I thanked her for that. She appreciated me for acknowledging the workload that she had. So we were able to have mutual respect and kind of thanks for one another. It was a great situation. We worked together for 2.5, 3 years. If I hadn't have got a job at a different school where I wanted to really go to, I would have happily stayed working with her. It was a great situation, a great co-teaching experience, and I still talk to her to this day, years later. So it can be a great thing, having a co-teacher. It can make teaching heaven, not hell. So yes, having a co-teacher can be amazing. It can be a boon to any classroom. However, if I were to guess, I'd say around 80% of my co-teaching experiences have in fact been negative. Yet, as TESL newbies, you can learn a hell of a lot from an experienced co-teacher, someone who's been in the classroom for a while, someone who knows his or her way around a class, and if you pay attention and you're not too arrogant, you can learn a lot from that person. So keep an open mind. Learn as much as you can. Apply it to yourself. All right, so in the next video, we move away from teachers and we get into the messy subject of students. Students, like co-teachers, can be a nightmare. That said, I have many students that I still keep in touch with today. Some of them, 20 years later, they make the job. They make you love the job. They learn, they're interested, they're polite, they're kind. It just makes you want, they just make you want to go to work. They make the job great. So, putting aside those students that can make life a bit of hell, and as you'll see next week, some of them can, by and large, you're going to have a great time teaching students, regardless of the setting. Back home in whatever country you come from, or overseas, for example, for me, like in Asia, it's just great. Okay, so that wraps it up today. Thanks a lot for watching. And if you find this content useful, please remember to share it with other TESL newbies. If you have friends that are TESL newbies, they might want to get some of the information that I'm trying to share. After all, in a sense, in the big picture, we're all co-teachers together. So let's help one another. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.